I came to somewhere outside, drooling onto an asphalt pillow. An oily smell filled my nostrils. As I rose, bits of gravel fell from my face and the side of my head ached. There was a pool of blood that glowed black under the mercury lights of the casino parking lot. I touched a gash at the corner of my right eye. A gash that would require stitches if I was the cosmetic type. I didn't have time for such things, and I would rather be picking gravel out of the wound for weeks. My wallet had been thrown nearby, rifled through, and relieved of a handful of singles that the casino hadn't gotten to. I picked it up and got my bearings, felt around my body for any hidden wounds. Everything was accounted for, and then some. In my pocket was a wadded up ball of paper. I opened it. It was a note on casino stationery that read, "It's not too late to turn back." Unfortunately for whoever had written the note, I'd never been a very punctual person. By the time I got to where I needed to be, it would be too late to turn back. I found my car, got in, and made the long drive home. I began to phone into work. Everything seemed so inconsequential and trivial. I procrastinated constantly and showed up late. My paperwork was constantly overdue and behind schedule. I thought of the Dennis Burrow case constantly. I obsessed over it like a promising date that had gone poorly. I've begun to have trouble sleeping at night too. I had dreams of the tall gray man. No matter the location in my dreams, he always watched me from afar. I came to find out that a half pint at the end of the day kept the nightmares away. As for Amy Burrow, I began to stake out her house every few nights to see what I could see. This work was not sanctioned by the department. In fact, the Dennis disappearance case was moved into the inactive stack due to lack of new evidence. I was doing the casing of her place off the clock, and I could get into real trouble if someone from the department found out. There was a for sale sign in her front yard. Continental Realty. Little Andy was beginning to grow up. He would waddle to her car each morning as she took him to daycare before she went to work. Lots of nights, especially on the weekends, Amy wouldn't even come home. I never went as far as following her from school to find out her mysterious whereabouts. I gave up hope on finding anything new from keeping tabs on her. I was starting to feel like a creep anyways. "Vio, you got those reports in yet?" Captain Hobbs asked as he burst into my office. I was staring down at my desk, massaging my temples. I had almost had my morning headache rubbed out. "Reports?" I asked. "Yeah, the suicide on Skylark. I need it on my desk yesterday. The ME's calling me about it, busting my ass about it." "Suicide? Skylark?" I had no recollection of such a thing. I had blown off a couple of calls a day or two ago. I just didn't show up. Maybe that was the suicide. I don't know. I stared at Captain Hobbs. He looked like he was in one of those moods, ready to take out some other long-simmering frustrations on the closest victim. Since he had been promoted and dealt with the general public less, he tended to take it out on us here at the station as opposed to John Q. Public. Detective Rausch slid into the room with a stack of papers and handed them to Hobbs. "You handed that off to me, remember? You were tied up with that, other deal." A bit slow on the uptake, I gave Rausch a sideways glance. Yeah, Rausch took that over for me. He's a real team player, an asset to the department. I said. Hobbs looked at both of us and stared down at the report that had just been handed to him. He left the room, grumbling to himself. "Thanks, man," I said. "Don't mention it." "What's the deal here lately? You look like shit," said Roush. "Oh, just the usual. Haven't been thinking clearly or sleeping too well. I think it's my mattress," I told him. Roush gave me a skeptical look. "Maybe you should take a few days off. Get your shit together. I know you've got the sick time saved up. I'm serious. I can't cover for your ass too much more. I'm gonna get drug in," he said. "I guess a vacation is just what I need. I could work with that," I told him. "Hey, yeah, and one other thing. Do you still have that card I gave you for Dr. Rosenberg? You should try giving her a call. If not her, somebody." I waved him off. "I just need some rest," I said. "I don't need to revisit any old wounds." "Okay, suit yourself," he shrugged. The way my little vacation fell, I had my Sunday morning coming down moment on a Wednesday. I slept in, and with no rush to get to work, the headache wasn't as bad. I sipped a cup of coffee and had another for dessert. Then I put on my cleanest dirty shirt and went out to greet the day. The birds were chirping and the traffic was light. All the other schmucks were at work or school. It was such a nice day. I paced the sidewalks all over town. Later, I stopped off at a park and sat for a while. I felt a clarity and a relaxation fall over me. I decided I was going to take a few extra days off. I spent the next several days in a routine. I'd get up, make my rounds around town, feel the morning air, then get home and actually eat a real lunch. I would spend a few hours with evidence from the Dennis case. I would spread the files and notes and pictures all over my living room and just stare, pacing around the pile until something would pop out at me. Sometimes it helped to go back to the beginning. So I went back to day one and wrote out some things that had stuck out like sore thumbs at a hitchhiker's convention. First, Dennis and Amy Burroughs' relationship had been on the rocks. She had said they hadn't been intimate lately. She had been pushing for pregnancy and he had been reluctant and may have been infertile. The message board posting I had found on Amy's computer seemed to confirm this. 2. Reports from the neighbors of unusual happenings that had been resolved. There were a slew of missing pets that had turned out to be slaughtered by one Rudy Knowles, a gentleman from the state psych hospital in a clown outfit. He seemed the most likely suspect at the time, but we had no evidence and no body to tie to him, just the dead pets. There was the string of vehicle break-ins with a missing expensive digital camera. The vehicle thieves were later caught and the camera was found with an image of Dennis on it. There were the increased sightings of Trenchy, the town's known and harmless schizophrenic rambler, who had been seen more in Dennis's particular neighborhood. Now, Trenchy and Rudy Knowles were separate individuals, and just both former residents of the state psych facility in town. I had still seen Trenchy roaming the streets since Rudy had been recommitted. 3. At Dennis's place of work, there was a lackluster response about his disappearance. No known affairs or workplace romances, douchebag bosses, a newish paralegal with a strange tattoo on the back of her neck, one of the bosses making possible lewd comments about Dennis's wife as I left. 4. Later, there was a pregnant Amy. the date of conception seemingly before Dennis's disappearance. Was it infidelity? 5. There was Dennis's mom and their strange, estrangled relationship. The death of his younger brother at a young age, and a mom that mourned her long-dead son more than her missing adult son. And finally, number 6. A tall gray man that was in the restroom of the casino right before I blacked out. Had he been real? Had something been in the tea that I drank? Or was I losing it? Each day after I reviewed the case and thought on it for a while, I'd go over to the Athenaeum, a cozy bar near campus. What was it about the atmosphere of a tavern that kept me coming back? Was it the din of the conversations and the background music? Or was it the shelves of bottles, the row of draft beer ornaments, the mirror behind the bar? In any city, I could disappear into a bar like this and I'd be at home. Jason Isabel once wrote, "If you don't sit facing the window, you could be in any town." I, of course, am not the only one who is drawn to these places of drink like a moth to a flame. And I don't think that it's just the alcohol. There are reasons that bars are designed the way that they are. Years and years of trial and error have let the establishments know what works and what doesn't when it comes to the atmosphere of a good bar. What keeps people coming back? Dim lighting, dark wood paneling, an element of coziness. The muffled conversations, the dark, the warmth. You might as well be crawling into a womb. You smell cigarette smoke less and less in these places. I no longer have that aromatic indicator to take me back. Signpost of nostalgia stripped away. It's not about the conversation for me. Sometimes I'll talk to the bartender or patrons beside me, but mostly I just listen. From here on, I'd have a few pints of beer. They had quite the selection on draft. I started cutting back on the harder stuff. After that, I would linger in the atmosphere a little while longer and then make my way home where I would sleep the innocent slumber of a newborn. It was all really nice. I felt like I was coming back into my old self. On one of my final days off, I was well into my 3rd pint, the cold amber liquid tasting like heaven. The happy hour crowd was starting to filter in and I was about to skedaddle. From a booth behind me, I heard uproarious and annoying laughter. The voices around it sounded familiar. I looked over my shoulder and I saw my old pals, McDougal and Kuhlman, Dennis's former bosses. I couldn't remember who was who. Douchebags like that, well, they all looked alike to me. They were yucking it up with highballs in the back booth. I couldn't make out what they were saying. They joked with and annoyed the waitress as she went by, and she laughed and played along politely. I signaled the bartender over. "Do those guys come in here often? They look familiar," I asked. The bartender was a slim gal who always wore the same black getup as part of the dress code of the Athenaeum. "Rick and Jay? They come in every now and then. Rick is dating one of my good friends, Lisa. She's a paralegal at their firm, so she usually makes him stop by when I'm working. I don't know where she is right now." "Rick's dating Lisa?" I asked, my mind reeling. "Oh, you know Lisa?" the bartender asked me. I had some business at their firm a while back. I thought that Rick was married. The bartender glanced over at their booth. They were both crowded around a smartphone, smirking at a video like kids in front of Saturday morning cartoons. She ducked down closer to me so that she could whisper. I turned my ear towards her mouth so that I wouldn't stare at her cleavage. That was now very visible as her blouse hung down as she leaned. He was. It's been a big scandal of sorts. He left his wife and kids and has been running around with her. I don't condone it. Not like that. But they're both adults. So who am I to judge? See, it says right here, she said. She pulled up the side of her shirt. Black ink on pale skin, just below her ribcage, and wrapping around towards her back. Only Cthulhu can judge me, the tattoo read. She seemed proud of it. I grumbled. Who was Cthulhu? Look, he may seem like a douchebag, but Rick's really changed since they started dating. Lisa's really rubbed off on him. We have these get-togethers up at his place. So far, his ex hasn't taken him for his home yet. So these things get wild, she told me. Sounds like he's really changed. Did you know Dennis? Who? She questioned. Nobody. I'll take my check, please, when you get a chance. I couldn't avoid a quick glance down at her cleavage. I wasn't trying to, it was more of a reflex than anything. But what I saw almost made me fall out of the chair. On her right breast, at the upper outer quadrant where her chest joined her armpit, was a tattoo. It was the same symbol as the one that had been tattooed on the back of her friend Lisa's neck. I made my way over to the back booth. I am so getting one of those when the next check from Iblis comes in, said Jay. Heard anything about Dennis lately? I asked. The lawyer boys looked up at me, their eyes narrowed in a bored confusion. Who? Dennis Burrow, the lawyer at your firm that went missing, I told them. They acted as if they had to think about it for a while. And who are you, bud? Rick asked. Detective VO. I came by your firm last year and talked with you about Dennis. I was just wondering if you had heard anything, I said. Oh, yeah, right. Nope, we haven't heard anything. He hasn't called. Well, that's an interesting statement since I don't think that he would be in the capacity to call at this stage, I said. Look, bud, we're kind of busy right now. Is there anything else? Yeah, I was wondering if you could help me with a question that I've been having. Rick sighed and rolled his eyes. Of course, shoot. Is that paralegal worth breaking up a family over? His face instantly turned angry and he quickly stood up, banging his knee on the table very hard but trying to ignore it. His buddy Jay stood up as well and held him back and said, "It's not worth it, man." I turned to walk away. She was coming towards the back as I left, Lisa, the little paralegal. She didn't even acknowledge my presence. I glanced at her back and her hair was mostly down to her shoulders. But through the strands as she moved, I could see the eye tattoo staring back at me. I looked everywhere for eyes. It didn't help that they were on my currency, peeking out at me as I bought my morning coffee. It didn't help that everyone had a tattoo these days. Nurses, teachers, firefighters, other cops, even youth ministers. It used to be that those that had lots of tattoos were sailors or punk rockers or ex-cons. Now the counterculture had simply become the culture. You had to get a neck tattoo to stand out, but even that was slipping into the mainstream. Whatever. It only made it harder to scan everyone I came in contact with. I didn't see any more Illuminati-looking eyes. I did see lots of birds, wings, and feathers. Maybe the bird people were in on something. A new race of winged, feathered humanoids ready to rise up and take over. I quit going to the Athenaeum, with its bartender that had connections with Lisa. Lisa, the little paralegal. Lisa, the Illuminati hottie homewrecker. Where did she fit into all of this? I returned to work, more sober, more rested, more driven, and yet more paranoid. I wondered if people in the department were in on something too, trying to undermine my interest and obsession with the case. How quickly they had pushed the Dennis case to the side or just didn't care. Had they pushed it aside, or had they simply grown bored? Simply forgotten it? I scanned the visible skin of all the officers looking for more tattoos. I even hung out in the guys' locker room. But they had always been more skeptical of me in there, so I couldn't do that much. I secured the address of J. McDougal, senior partner of the contract law firm McDougal & Coleman. I pulled the real estate data from the county assessor's house. Home valued at $2.4 million. Very pricey in this part of the country. 7,500 square feet. And on 5 acres of property. I gathered some gear from the equipment room. Night vision goggles and flashlights and a few flashbang grenades. It was time for a little reconnaissance mission. The low and repetitive beats of bass throbbed rhythmically in the distance. Warm lights shone through every window of the mansion as I stared from the brush under cover. From the glass ceiling of the conservatory-looking room to the side of the house, pink lights glowed into the night sky. As I neared, the bass grew louder and I could make out the high-pitched strains of something that sounded like the opening of that one Led Zeppelin song. You know, the one that goes, "Ah!" It sounded kind of like that, but more high-pitched and warbly. A call to Jay's wife had been more than helpful. She was currently living in a townhouse with the kids during the separation. She had no desire to take ownership of the gaudy and flashy mansion in the first place. I discussed that the firm hadn't been very forthcoming with information regarding a case, and that I wanted to go by and visit with Jay. After some talking, she thought that it would be a good idea for me to go by and check up on things. I was essentially working as her own free private investigator. Surveillance, there was some, but it was not being watched on a live feed anywhere. It was only there to view after the fact. Alarms were only turned on when no one was home. As for tonight, she suspected a party of sorts because he had made it explicitly clear to not bring the kids by. Also, he was adamant that she not show up unannounced. As far as entry went, the conservatory/greenhouse was always open. I didn't really need the night vision. Dim blue solar lights lit up a winding driveway that led from the street to the mansion's front entry. Those and the distant lights from the city provided ample illumination. The sudden disparity between the climates of the greenhouse and the crisp autumn air outside was dizzying. Broad-leaved green jungle plants looked dark under the pinkish lights. Swampy humidity struck my face and my brow grew sweaty. I wished that I could have taken off my jacket. I crept along a middle path between ferns. I heard the burble of a fountain. Something flapped around by the glass ceiling. The music was louder, but I couldn't tell that it was in the house. I heard no voices and I saw no signs of human life. The greenhouse ended in a square tiled room. Sconce shell lamps illuminated the sparse room, and the tile was in a mosaic spiral pattern. An aquarium on a wrought iron metal stand held a tentacled creature about the size of a football. If I kept moving forward, I would hit the main foyer and entryway. Suddenly, something heavy fell on my shoulder and slid down the front of my body. I looked up to see a shelf that lined the room. Then I looked down to see a long, stretching gold tentacle beginning to entwine itself around my leg. Its eyes were red. Before I could make heads or tails of anything, another long, thick, muscular tentacle wrapped itself around my neck and squeezed.